And now I will talk, read this Katy Chukrov interview about performance. And she's the author of a book that's called To Be and Perform. And she's analyzing the notion of theater and performance in the theater and contemporary art. And she's talking interesting things I will read. Performing is seen not as a criticism of the institution of art, but as a fall from the very existence. Very many artistic theories, especially those that Deleuze philosophy and post-structuralist theories as a whole, insisted that art is a process of identifying everyday reality in all its immanence. A similar approach, oddly enough, is peculiar to Heidegger, which is described in his work, The Source of Art Creation. He says that only the artistic work gives us understanding what being is. According to this approach, the work must reveal a certain state of existence that cannot be manifested without a work of art. Only artwork makes it clear how something is. I also wanted to turn to such practices, or rather the processes, that consider a work of art as some extremality, an extreme that falls out of being, while retaining some genetic connection with being, because it is in it that something happened. However, the artistic process reacting to what happened is forced to not coincide with being, to break out of it. Derrida, philosopher. Derrida, philosopher, really nice one, talking about many interesting things. He has this term called difference. Difference. He's a French. In conditions of difference, Derrida has neither being nor non-existence. Neither a dropout from it nor an attempt to reveal the conditions of this existence. Such a task would be essentialist for him. There is only a difference, namely the constant process of postponing everything with everything, undomesticating everything from everything. This is a radical statement, almost competing with the totality of the Hegelian system. Hegel establishes a request for an absolute spirit, with which the entire objective world must rejoin. Yes, rejoin with the spirit. Derrida declares the end of metaphysics. But this end is due to the fact that all absolutes, essential elements, meaning things, which sense something to something, are deconstructed. And it remains only deconstruction as an ever to be accomplished process. So the only thing that is stays is this deconstruction, difference. You differentiate kind of all the time. In this process, it's impossible for something to happen because everything in it is constantly hybridized, atomized, and differs. Okay. And for Heidegger, his being only then manifests itself when such procedures are included as a work of art. I talk all these names like Heidegger, or other philosophers, but you can listen to what they actually say, not to their names or not to the history of their names. So, the mode of art is not an aesthetics for Heidegger. He relates art not to Kant's aesthetics, because art is very much associates itself with aesthetics. That is to say, with the perception of the beautiful and the judgment of it, but with the regime of truth. So for Heidegger, art is not an aesthetics which kind of judges or say something beautiful or not, but it's connected with the regime of truth. The mode of truth is not connected with aesthetics. Art is a medium for revealing what is and how it is, not an aesthetic category, that is, category of taste. Theater, play, and performance are a process of extreme presence, when something happened and we are forced to declassify, uncover, and expose it. Theater is a declassification, which is uncovering secrets. In Derrida, it turns out that if there is neither being nor non-existence, if there is neither absence nor presence, but there is this permanent postponement and procedural removal of everything from everything, if there is no truth, if there is no possibility of expressing something, there is no possibility of identification. Then art should be devoted to this impossibility of expression. Derrida does not say that art should be told no. He says that art can be about this impossibility of presence, impossibility to define something as existing and expressible. So there are some terms, which is the event, an animal, and difference, what they mean. The event is a concept of modern philosophy. And according to Heidegger, it means a pure phenomenon that is not correlated with any agent. The duration outside of time and space in which being becomes what it is. An animal is a category of modern philosophy that allows one to think of a person, to establish a conventionally conditional framework of the human. So animal helps us to create the notion of what is human. Difference is a neologism introduced by Derrida as a combination of the values of two consonant words, differer and differ, which is deassemble and deconstruct. The inability to find and fix the final value. So what he was talking about is that everything is in this process of difference where there is no value, there is no aesthetics, where everything is just in this constant process of like deconstruction. So we can't come to something because it's a continuous difference. So an event is, in a sense, an exit into an act, when it is necessary to show explicit fidelity to something. Derrida always returns to the ritual of inability to say yes or no, as I said, yes, no final thing. Theater, play, and performance are a process of extreme presence, when something happened and we are forced to declassify, uncover, and expose it. Theater is a declassification. We must admit the most impossible, maybe shameful, but what is even more difficult, we must play and fulfill it. That's why we are doing the replay. So we start the game, the performance. Maybe Virginia, that's for you. Derrida doesn't disclose the secret. He must always remain a secret, not because the unspeakable is a certain thing in itself, but because there is no essence or truth that could be communicated. So he talks about this opening of secrets, and that we must admit that that we have to play performance again and again to reveal the secrets and fulfill it. So the question to her, are we going back to the performance of the event again in the theater? Yes, the event occurred, but it does not exist if it is not repeated. We have some repressed memory of it, and the repetition doesn't happen so that we reproduce our trauma. We repeat not the trauma, but we repeat how we score this trauma. We repeat not our pain, but we repeat how we abolish our pain, we abandon it. This is actually art, in any case performative, musical, or theatrical. That is, in the end, we repeat not what happened, like we repeat not the secret, but we repeat something else. Therefore, Deleuze also speaks of eternal return, but the return is always another. Like every performance is something, shows us something other. An event cannot be returned if there is a memory of something. But we can never repeat it the way it was. So in any case, in the tragedy, for example, the theater arises from tragedy, but tragedy is always in connection with comic. And we repeat how we, in a certain sense, laugh at our pain. So performance, taking roots in the tragedy, is actually a repetition of how we laugh at our own pain. Such an absurd comedy is an integral part of the tragedy. And she gives a nice example what is how we express something as tragedy, for example. But why is laughter included in the tragic? I will try to explain this to you through the logic of the game. There is such an opera called Abandoned Dido, the famous myth about how Dido perishes abandoned by Aeneas, who leaves the island, so a love drama. The author of the opera, Henry Purcell. And there is a wonderful singer, Jeanette Baker, who performs the final aria of the dying Dido, but does not do it like other singers, trying to portray a sorrowful experience. Attempting to portray an experience or pain is a mistake of so many actors who play the role of tragic characters like Hamlet, King Lear, and so on. So Jeanette Baker, this aria singer, performing her aria, punctuates her with clowning. She mourns, but in her game she is stronger than mourning. She must conquer her grief with humor in relation to her. This humorous gesture is a slight excess of the circumstances themselves. And it's not just laughter, it's a deep, grotesque humor when you laugh at your destiny. A tragedy would be impossible if it were not impossible to exceed circumstances in the game. The game, music, clowning, all actors' affectivity in this excess of what happened in the mode of being. Deleuze, in The Logic of Meaning, writes that the actor is someone who jumps in one place, but he remains in this smash of accomplished gravity. But on the other hand, he can make an attempt to jump out of it. The same with the artist. The artist is the one who sees what happened, the one who cannot forget this, and therefore repeats. But in this repetition, he paradoxically overcomes his effect by playing. This is the theater, its performative incidents. The artist is not, because he has a taste, aesthetic practice, or some kind of skill. The artist at Deleuze, his model of creative effect, is connected with the fact that he cannot come off from the event, and it is the moment when he starts returning to the event through the paradoxical, repeated practice. And this is his artwork. But the artist does it not only an act of performance, but the whole complex, an event, and the repetition, the entire kind of genealogy. In other words, in art, there are always two events where something has happened, and the event of a repetition of this something. While in postmodernism, art consists only of kind of science and text. In postmodernism, the text is divorced from what happened, and from events, things, and from reality. And there is a gap between being and repetition, or performance. But they are nevertheless related. So this is kind of a synthesis. So actually this whole text is about that we have something and then we have to repeat it. And in repetition it becomes something else. And there is a whole bunch of things happening in it. So it kind of, maybe there is also this very nice notion which I've in the beginning said, like this in between. So each repetition or each performance is kind of this, becomes the space in between. So you go deeper and deeper in your own performance, and then maybe it becomes completely something else, because it's already not a trauma which you kind of, around which you created this performance. Or maybe you understood it somehow different, I don't know. So there is also very interesting this notion of the other, which I wanted to talk, and the notion of animal. And there are philosophers like Podoroga, Deleuze, Agamben, and they talk about this agent of animalistic thing. And this is a metaphor also. These authors examined animal not as a biological phenomenon, and even not within the limits of criticism of anthropocentrism, as in the case in modern works or on gender theory. But it is a kind of metaphorical operator or imaginary agent of action. Imaginary agent of action, which is interesting if you work with performance or Buddha dance, for example. So for Podoroga, philosopher, the animal is a kind of mania that is not realized by the artist himself. This is when the speech in the artistic mode does not yet belong to the author, nor to the imaginary character. It should appear, as it were, out of dumbness, which is not directly related to language, but is still some kind of non-manifestation, some fantastic yet unarticulated, unnamed behavior. Podoroga always refers to such literary experiences in which speech arises from the strange behavior of imitating oneself as another. Animal is a topography of this incomprehensible artistic act, those processes from which the work should arise, but which may not be realized by the author himself and be mapped already post factum by observer or the reader. So, and for Deleuze. In Deleuze, the animal is a marker of becoming different, but also becoming not self for the sake of another. And this another for which you should become not self, kind of a minority deprived of power, and it is weak. But this formation is not in the name of weakness, for it's through the willingness to become weak instead of another that this one acquires power and is emancipated. And in general, in this model of becoming an animal, it is more important to be ready to become not self as an ethical position, and not as an investigation of what is to be an animal. Agamben. In Agamben, on the contrary, the animal just collapses all the requests and claims for expression and expressiveness. An animal is someone who you can kill, but does not have death. In this case, the animal is viewed through the prism of the biopolitics of exclusion. The animal should be de-ontologized because it is already excluded from being and from the world. It has only a habitat, environment, not the world. In this case, the animal becomes the threshold from which to begin any thinking about art or politics. So, if an animal is not allowed to act or be in the world, art must be dedicated to this dumb, ineffective state, which Agamben calls inoperosity. The argument against this position can be that this position of reducing knowledge and action to ignorance and inaction is not realized by Agamben as in some sense artificial and mimetic. A person, in order to make a step to such an apophatic state, must make a conscious effort. A person will know that he reduces himself to the state of an animal, unlike an animal itself, and this makes it forever not quite an animal. So what prevents modern art from being near the event? Modern art has lost its negative genealogy in negative ontology. The avant-garde project has also ended, and it will not exist until there is a revolutionary situation, until there is a radical need for socialization in society. Radical abolition of art in the forefront is always connected with the fact that social is much more revolutionary, radical than what happens in art. But it seems to me that now the most radical kind of work with reality is economic and cognitive strategies. Therefore, I believe that today the subject of the avant-garde, or false avant-garde, if you will, is precisely cognitive capitalism, which generates new pockets of knowledge, new institutions, network, and infrastructures. What leads to the production of knowledge in this case? How does this affect the actual course of events? Increasingly, reality is produced by capital. Even this cafe she was sitting in, and we're sitting in the university. Even this cafe in which we sit is part of some industry, a network that is part of another investment program that is embedded in the next. There is some infrastructure that produces reality, and in this sense is the movement of capital. It seems to me that contemporary art is no longer a continuation of the avant-garde project. Work with the economy is much more avant-garde. It's not surprising, therefore, that municipal structures are engaged in public art, and not some crazy artist who is trying to transcode the work of urban spaces in the mode of situationalism, as it was before. Okay, one boring part ended, there is another boring part. And so maybe to sum up, so what she says, that was the philosopher Katy Chukrov. For her, this notion of theater is kind of philosophical category. And she kind of philosophize environment, and which is kind of anyway eaten by capitalism or some kind of structures. And the gesture of artists can't be any more kind of situationalistic or crazy. Even if this gesture will be crazy, it still will be in some kind of framework which he cannot control or influence. So she took this terms of Deleuze of difference, and for me this difference connected to this notion of in between, of kind of just being present and repeat and going into some kind of other space through this repetition and through this kind of artificial environment as theater is. And also this nice kind of comparison with animal, or animal as a metaphor for the other, and how you kind of can switch, and what is it, how you understand animal. Through the animalistic approach you can understand what is human, and also kind of there is this transference of meaning, which, and when you can step back from human, you kind of create this space for yourself to move somewhere. So, and another interesting thing was